Question 1. Implementation of a comprehensive analysis of current and historical Mississippi real estate market data, including local economic trends such as employment rates, population growth, and interest rate impacts specific to Mississippi, is the most appropriate strategy for a Mississippi real estate salesperson advising a client on market conditions. Which of the following alternative approaches would be considered professionally deficient and potentially violate Mississippi real estate licensing laws? Option A. A thorough analysis of current and historical Mississippi real estate market data, including local economic trends such as employment rates, population growth, and interest rate impacts specific to Mississippi. Option B. Focusing solely on national economic trends without considering their specific applicability or impact on the Mississippi market. Option C. Dismissing current economic indicators as irrelevant to the Mississippi real estate market. Option D. Making definitive predictions about future market appreciation based on limited or anecdotal evidence. Correct answer is A. A thorough analysis of current and historical Mississippi real estate market data, including local economic trends such as employment rates, population growth, and interest rate impacts specific to Mississippi. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Mississippi to navigate the complexities of local market dynamics and economic indicators, while upholding their fiduciary duties to clients and adhering to Mississippi real estate licensing laws. The salesperson must balance providing informed advice with avoiding speculative predictions or misrepresentations that could mislead clients or violate regulation. Careful judgment is required to interpret economic data and its potential impact on the local real estate market without making guarantees. The best professional approach involves a thorough analysis of current and historical Mississippi real estate market data, including local economic trends such as employment rates, population growth, and interest rate impacts specific to Mississippi. This approach prioritizes providing clients with objective information and context about market conditions, empowering them to make informed decisions. This aligns with Mississippi Real Estate Commission regulations that mandate licensees to be knowledgeable about market conditions and to avoid misrepresentation or concealment of material facts. It also upholds the ethical obligation to act in the best interest of the client by providing a realistic assessment of the market. An incorrect approach would be to focus solely on national economic trends without considering their specific applicability or impact on the Mississippi market. This fails to provide clients with relevant and localized information, potentially leading to decisions based on incomplete or misleading data. It also neglects the salesperson's duty to be knowledgeable about local market conditions as required by Mississippi law. Another incorrect approach is to make definitive predictions about future market appreciation based on limited or anecdotal evidence. This constitutes speculation and can be construed as misrepresentation, violating Mississippi Real Estate Commission rules against making false promises or guarantees regarding future market performance. Such predictions can create unrealistic expectations and expose both the client and the licensee to significant risk. Finally, an incorrect approach is to dismiss current economic indicators as irrelevant to the Mississippi real estate market. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to understand how broader economic factors can influence local property values and transaction volumes. It also fails to meet the professional standard of providing informed advice based on a comprehensive understanding of market influences. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's objectives, followed by a comprehensive research phase that includes both national and, crucially, localized economic and market data relevant to Mississippi. This data should be analyzed to identify trends and potential impacts, which are then communicated to the client in an objective and informative manner, emphasizing that market conditions are subject to change and cannot be guaranteed. Question 2. To address the challenge of accurately valuing a standard single-family home in Tupelo, Mississippi, for a seller who wants to list their property, which property valuation method would a Mississippi licensed real estate salesperson most appropriately utilize to provide a realistic estimated market value? Option A, replacement cost method. Option B, cost approach. Option C, comparative market analysis. Option D, income approach. The correct answer is C, comparative market analysis. Explanation, scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for Mississippi real estate licensees, determining the most appropriate valuation method for a unique property. The challenge lies in selecting a method that not only reflects the property's current market value, but also aligns with Mississippi Real Estate Commission (MREC) regulations and ethical standards for providing accurate and reliable information to clients. Misapplication of valuation methods can lead to misinformed decisions by buyers and sellers, potentially resulting in financial harm and regulatory action. Correct approach analysis. The most appropriate approach in this scenario is the comparative market analysis, CMA. A CMA is a method used by real estate professionals to estimate the value of a property by comparing it to similar properties that have recently sold, are currently listed, or have expired in the same geographic area. This approach is particularly effective for residential properties, which are often the subject of a CMA. Mississippi real estate licensees are expected to use their knowledge of the local market and comparable sales to provide clients with a realistic price range. MREC regulations emphasize the importance of providing accurate and competent service, and a CMA, when performed diligently, directly supports this by grounding the valuation in observable market data. It is the standard practice for licensees when advising sellers on listing prices or buyers on offering prices for typical residential properties. Incorrect approaches analysis. Using the income approach would be inappropriate and potentially misleading in this situation. The income approach estimates property value based on the income it generates or could generate. While this method is crucial for income-producing properties like apartment buildings or commercial spaces, it is not suitable for a single-family residence that is not primarily an investment vehicle. Applying it to a non-income-producing property would require making speculative assumptions about potential rental income, which is not a reliable indicator of market value for a typical home and could violate MREC requirement for competent service based on factual data. The cost approach, which estimates value by calculating the cost to replace or reproduce the property minus depreciation, is also not the best fit here. This method is most useful for newer properties or special-purpose buildings where comparable sales are scarce or income data is unavailable. For a typical single-family home, especially one with some age, accurately estimating depreciation can be highly subjective and complex, and it often doesn't reflect what a buyer is willing to pay in the current market. Relying solely on the cost approach for a standard residential property could lead to an inaccurate valuation that doesn't align with market realities, potentially violating MREC duty to provide accurate market information. Professional reasoning. When faced with property valuation, Mississippi licensees should first consider the property type and its primary use. For standard residential properties, the comparative market analysis is the go-to method due to its reliance on current market data and its alignment with MREC expectations for competent service. If the property is an income-producing asset, the income approach becomes relevant. For unique or new constructions where comparables are limited, the cost approach might be considered as a supplementary tool. A professional licensee will always prioritize the method that best reflects the current market conditions and the property's characteristics, ensuring the advice provided to clients is accurate, ethical, and compliant with Mississippi regulations. Question 3. Examination of the data shows that a buyer client in Mississippi has had their loan application for a specific property denied by their chosen lender due to an unexpected appraisal gap. The buyer is disappointed and expresses a strong desire to proceed with this particular property, suggesting that the salesperson should simply find another lender who will approve the loan without question. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Mississippi real estate salesperson? Option A. Clearly explain the lender's denial and the appraisal gap to the buyer, discuss the implications, and proactively explore alternative financing options or strategies that are compliant with lending regulations and the buyer's financial situation. Option B. Advise the buyer to consider providing inflated income figures or other misleading information to a new lender to overcome the appraisal gap and secure loan approval. Option C. Continue to market the property to other potential buyers while withholding the information about the current buyer's loan denial from all parties involved. Option D. Assure the buyer that the appraisal gap is a minor issue and that another lender will undoubtedly approve the loan, encouraging the buyer to remain optimistic without further investigation. The correct answer is A. Clearly explain the lender's denial and the appraisal gap to the buyer, discuss the implications, and proactively explore alternative financing options or strategies that are compliant with lending regulations and the buyer's financial situation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate salesperson in Mississippi to navigate the complexities of financing options while ensuring compliance with Mississippi's real estate license law and ethical obligations to their client. The salesperson must balance the client's desire for a specific loan product with the lender's underwriting requirements and the salesperson's duty to provide accurate and honest information. Misrepresenting loan terms or failing to disclose material facts can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves clearly and accurately communicating the lender's decision and the reasons for it to the buyer, while also exploring alternative financing options that align with the buyer's financial profile and the property's value. This approach upholds the salesperson's duty of honesty and full disclosure as mandated by Mississippi real estate license law, which requires licensees to act in the best interest of their clients and to avoid misrepresentation. By explaining the lender's rationale and proactively suggesting other viable loan programs or lenders, the salesperson demonstrates competence and a commitment to helping the buyer achieve their goal of homeownership within realistic financial parameters. This also aligns with the ethical principle of fiduciary duty, requiring the agent to act with loyalty and good faith towards the client. Incorrect approaches analysis. Presenting the loan denial as a mere formality and assuring the buyer that another lender will definitely approve the loan without concrete evidence or a thorough review of alternative options constitutes misrepresentation. This violates Mississippi real estate license law's prohibition against making false promises or misleading statements. It also breaches the duty of care by creating unrealistic expectations and potentially leading the buyer to waste time and resources pursuing improbable financing. Suggesting that the buyer can cook the books or inflate their income on a future loan application to secure approval is unethical and illegal. This directly contravenes Mississippi's real estate license law, which prohibits fraudulent or dishonest practices. Engaging in such advice would expose both the salesperson and the buyer to severe legal penalties, including potential criminal charges. Ignoring the lender's denial and continuing to market the property as if the financing is secured without informing the buyer of the setback is a failure to disclose material information. Mississippi real estate license law requires licensees to keep their clients informed of all material facts and developments. This omission can lead to a breach of contract and significant damages for the buyer, as well as disciplinary action against the salesperson. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize transparency, honesty, and adherence to regulatory requirements. When faced with a financing challenge, the decision-making framework should involve 1. Understanding the client's goals and financial situation. 2. Clearly communicating all relevant information, including lender decisions and their underlying reasons. 3. Exploring all legitimate and viable options in collaboration with the client. 4. Providing realistic advice based on facts and regulations. 5. Documenting all communications and decisions. This systematic approach ensures that the client's best interests are served while maintaining professional integrity and legal compliance. Question 4. Research into a client's potential home purchase in Mississippi reveals they are exploring different financing options. As a licensed real estate salesperson, how should you best explain the fundamental differences between fixed rate, adjustable rate, and interest-only mortgages to help them understand the basic mechanics of each? Option A. Describe the core characteristics of each mortgage type, focusing on how their payment structures and interest rate behaviors differ, and advise them to consult with a mortgage lender for personalized financial advice. Option B. Recommend the adjustable rate mortgage as the most advantageous option due to its typically lower initial interest rate, which can help them save money in the short term. Option C. Advise them that a fixed-rate mortgage is always the safest bet and the only option worth considering for long-term financial stability. Option D. Suggest the interest-only mortgage as a superior choice for maximizing their cash flow during the initial years of homeownership, without detailing the repayment of the principal. The correct answer is A. Describe the core characteristics of each mortgage type, focusing on how their payment structures and interest rate behaviors differ, and advise them to consult with a mortgage lender for personalized financial advice. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a Mississippi real estate salesperson to balance client needs with regulatory compliance when discussing mortgage options. Misrepresenting or oversimplifying mortgage types can lead to significant financial harm for the client and potential legal repercussions for the salesperson, including license suspension or revocation under Mississippi law. The salesperson must ensure the client understands the fundamental differences and risks associated with each mortgage type without providing unlicensed financial advice. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly and accurately explaining the core characteristics and implications of each mortgage type, focusing on how they differ in payment structure and interest rate behavior. This approach educates the client on the basic mechanics of fixed rate, adjustable rate, and interest-only mortgages, empowering them to make informed decisions in consultation with a qualified mortgage lender. This aligns with Mississippi's regulations requiring licensees to act with honesty and integrity and to avoid misrepresentation. By sticking to factual descriptions of the mortgage products themselves, the salesperson remains within the bounds of their licensing authority and avoids offering financial advice, which is the purview of licensed loan officers or financial advisors. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves recommending a specific mortgage type based on the salesperson's personal opinion of what would be best for the client's financial situation. This constitutes providing unlicensed financial advice, which is a violation of Mississippi real estate licensing laws and regulations. Salespersons are not qualified or licensed to assess a client's financial capacity or recommend specific financial products. Another incorrect approach is to downplay the risks associated with adjustable-rate mortgages by emphasizing only the initial lower interest rates. This is a form of misrepresentation, as it fails to adequately inform the client about the potential for payment increases and the associated risks, which is a breach of ethical conduct and potentially violates Mississippi's consumer protection laws related to real estate transactions. A third incorrect approach is to present interest-only mortgages as a universally beneficial option for reducing immediate monthly payments without thoroughly explaining the long-term implications, such as the fact that the principal balance does not decrease during the interest-only period and will still need to be repaid. This omission of critical information constitutes a failure to provide full and accurate disclosure, which is a cornerstone of professional conduct and regulatory compliance in Mississippi. Professional reasoning. When advising clients on mortgage options, Mississippi real estate salespersons should adopt a framework of education and disclosure. First, understand the client's general needs and preferences. Second, provide clear, factual, and unbiased descriptions of the fundamental characteristics of available mortgage types, such as fixed rate, adjustable rate, and interest-only loans, highlighting their core differences in payment structure and interest rate behavior. Third, emphasize the importance of consulting with a licensed mortgage lender or financial advisor for personalized advice and to explore specific loan products. Fourth, avoid any language that could be construed as offering financial advice, making recommendations, or guaranteeing outcomes. This approach ensures compliance with licensing regulations, upholds ethical standards, and empowers the client to make informed decisions with qualified professionals. Question 5. When assisting a client in Mississippi who is looking to lease commercial property, and the client expresses confusion regarding the financial responsibilities beyond the base rent, which approach would be most appropriate for a licensed real estate salesperson to take? Option A. Clearly explain the distinctions between a gross lease and a net lease, detailing how expenses like property taxes, insurance, and maintenance are typically allocated under each, and answer all client questions thoroughly. Option B. Present the lease agreement with a brief mention that additional costs may apply and advise the client to consult with their attorney for clarification. Option C. Focus solely on negotiating the lowest possible base rental rate and assume the client will manage any additional lease-related expenses. Option D. Recommend the lease type that historically has resulted in the lowest base rent, without elaborating on the potential for increased operating expenses. The correct answer is A. Clearly explain the distinctions between a gross lease and a net lease, detailing how expenses like property taxes, insurance, and maintenance are typically allocated under each, and answer all client questions thoroughly. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Mississippi to navigate the nuances of lease agreements, specifically differentiating between a gross lease and a net lease, and understanding the implications of each for both the landlord and tenant. Misinterpreting these terms can lead to disputes, financial losses, and potential violations of Mississippi real estate license law, which mandates honesty and fair dealing. Careful judgment is required to ensure the client fully understands their obligations and rights under the chosen lease type. The best approach involves clearly explaining the fundamental differences between a gross lease and a net lease to the client, detailing the typical responsibilities for rent, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance under each. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the client's need for understanding before making a decision. Mississippi law, through its Real Estate Commission regulations, emphasizes the duty of licensees to provide accurate information and to act in the best interest of their clients. By educating the client thoroughly, the salesperson fulfills this fiduciary duty and ensures an informed decision, thereby preventing potential misunderstandings and future disputes. This aligns with the ethical obligation to promote the best interests of the client and to avoid misrepresentation. An incorrect approach would be to simply present the lease agreement without a thorough explanation of the different lease types, assuming the client will understand the implications of a net lease on their own. This fails to meet the salesperson's duty to inform and educate, potentially leading the client to agree to terms they do not fully comprehend, which could be considered a misrepresentation of the lease's impact. Another incorrect approach would be to recommend a specific lease type based on personal preference or a superficial understanding of the client's needs, without fully exploring the financial and operational implications for the client. This bypasses the crucial step of client education and informed consent, potentially violating the duty of loyalty and care owed to the client. A further incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the rental amount and overlook the allocation of other property-related expenses, such as property taxes and insurance, which are critical distinctions between gross and net leases. This incomplete explanation misleads the client about the total cost of occupancy and their responsibilities. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and informed consent. This involves 1. Identifying the client's core need, securing commercial space. 2. Understanding the available options, different lease types. 3. Thoroughly explaining the implications of each option. 4. Assessing the client's understanding and answering all questions. And 5. Facilitating a decision that aligns with the client's best interests and legal obligations. Question 6. The assessment process reveals that a Mississippi real estate salesperson is assisting a buyer with a standard purchase agreement. During the review of the document, the buyer presents a handwritten note with additional terms they wish to include. What is the most appropriate action for the salesperson to take to ensure the enforceability of the contract and uphold professional standards? Option A. Ignore the handwritten addendum and proceed with the original terms of the purchase agreement, as it is the officially drafted document. Option B. Ensure the handwritten addendum is clearly understood by both the buyer and seller, and that both parties initial the addendum and the main contract to signify their agreement to the modified terms before proceeding. Option C. Advise the buyer on whether the handwritten addendum is legally binding and how it might affect their position in the transaction. Option D. Accept the handwritten addendum as is and proceed with the purchase agreement, assuming the buyer and seller will resolve any discrepancies later. Correct answer is B. Ensure the handwritten addendum is clearly understood by both the buyer and seller, and that both parties initial the addendum and the main contract to signify their agreement to the modified terms before proceeding. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario where a Mississippi real estate salesperson is presented with a purchase agreement that contains a handwritten addendum. This situation is professionally challenging because the addendum, while seemingly minor, could significantly alter the terms of the original contract, potentially impacting the rights and obligations of both the buyer and seller. Careful judgment is required to ensure the contract remains legally sound and enforceable under Mississippi law, and that the salesperson acts ethically and within their licensing authority. The best professional approach involves ensuring that any handwritten addendum is clearly understood by all parties, properly initialed by both buyer and seller, and then incorporated into the formal purchase agreement. This ensures mutual assent to the modified terms. Mississippi law, like general contract law, requires offer, acceptance, consideration, and mutual assent for a contract to be enforceable. By having all parties initial the addendum and integrate it into the main agreement, the salesperson facilitates clear evidence of this mutual assent to the altered terms. This practice aligns with the Mississippi Real Estate Commission's emphasis on ethical conduct and the accurate representation of agreements. An incorrect approach would be to simply accept the handwritten addendum without ensuring it is properly initialed by both parties. This creates a significant risk of enforceability issues, as one party might later deny agreeing to the added terms. This failure to secure clear evidence of mutual assent directly contravenes the principles of contract formation and could lead to disputes, potentially violating Mississippi's real estate licensing laws regarding competent and ethical practice. Another incorrect approach is to advise one party on the legal implications of the addendum. Salespersons are not licensed attorneys and should not provide legal advice. Doing so exceeds the scope of their license and could lead to detrimental legal consequences for the client, as well as disciplinary action against the salesperson by the Mississippi Real Estate Commission. Finally, ignoring the handwritten addendum and proceeding with the original terms of the purchase agreement is also an unacceptable approach. This fails to acknowledge the potential intent of the parties to modify their agreement and could result in a contract that does not reflect their true understanding, leading to disputes and potential liability for the salesperson and their broker. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes clear communication, meticulous documentation, and adherence to legal and ethical boundaries. This involves verifying that all parties understand and agree to all terms, including any modifications, and ensuring that such modifications are properly executed and integrated into the final contract. When in doubt about legal interpretations or the enforceability of contract terms, professionals should always advise their clients to seek independent legal counsel. Question 7. Compliance review shows that a property manager in Mississippi is responsible for a portfolio of residential rental properties. What is the most effective approach to proactively identify and mitigate potential risks associated with managing these properties? Option A. Implement tenant screening criteria based on the manager's personal judgment and intuition, without a standardized, legally compliant process. Option B. Primarily focus on responding promptly to tenant complaints as they arise, addressing issues on a case-by-case basis without a broader preventative strategy. Option C. Prioritize minimizing operational costs by deferring non-essential maintenance and delaying necessary repairs to maximize the owner's immediate profit. Option D. Conduct a thorough risk assessment that includes reviewing lease agreements for compliance with Mississippi law, evaluating property habitability and safety standards, and ensuring fair housing practices are consistently applied in tenant screening and management. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough risk assessment that includes reviewing lease agreements for compliance with Mississippi law, evaluating property habitability and safety standards, and ensuring fair housing practices are consistently applied in tenant screening and management. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a property manager to balance the fiduciary duty owed to the property owner with the legal obligations and ethical considerations of managing a rental property in Mississippi. The manager must proactively identify and address potential risks to protect the owner's investment and ensure compliance with Mississippi landlord-tenant laws and fair housing regulations. A failure to do so can lead to legal liabilities, financial losses, and damage to the manager's reputation. The best approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies potential hazards, evaluates their likelihood and impact, and develops mitigation strategies. This includes reviewing lease agreements for compliance with Mississippi law, ensuring proper maintenance and habitability standards are met, and implementing fair housing practices in tenant screening and management. This proactive and systematic method aligns with the Mississippi Real Estate Commission's expectations for licensed professionals to act with diligence and competence, safeguarding both the client's interests and the public. It directly addresses the core responsibilities of property management by anticipating problems before they arise and ensuring adherence to all applicable regulations. An approach that focuses solely on responding to tenant complaints without a proactive risk assessment is insufficient. While addressing complaints is necessary, it is reactive rather than preventative. This failure to anticipate and mitigate risks can lead to more significant legal issues and financial damages for the owner, potentially violating the manager's duty of care. Another unacceptable approach is to prioritize cost-saving measures over essential property maintenance and safety. Mississippi law mandates that rental properties be maintained in a habitable condition. Neglecting necessary repairs or safety features to cut costs can result in code violations, tenant injuries, and significant legal liability for both the owner and the property manager, demonstrating a clear disregard for regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. Finally, an approach that overlooks fair housing laws during tenant screening and management is a serious ethical and legal failing. All prospective tenants must be treated equally, and screening criteria must be applied consistently and without discrimination based on protected characteristics. Violations of fair housing laws can lead to severe penalties and undermine the integrity of the property management profession. Professionals should employ a systematic risk management framework. This involves understanding the specific legal and regulatory landscape of Mississippi, identifying all potential risks associated with property management, legal, financial, operational, and reputational, assessing the severity of each risk, and implementing appropriate control measures. Regular review and adaptation of these strategies are crucial to maintaining compliance and protecting all parties involved. Question 8. The assessment process reveals that a Mississippi real estate salesperson has been asked by a seller to list a property that exhibits visible signs of significant foundation settlement and water damage in the basement. The seller expresses concern that disclosing these issues will deter potential buyers and asks the salesperson to omit them from the property disclosure statement. What is the most appropriate course of action for the salesperson to take to uphold their professional and legal obligations in Mississippi? Option A. Proceed with marketing the property without mentioning the foundation settlement and water damage, and instruct the seller to address these issues only if a buyer specifically inquires about them. Option B. Agree to the seller's request and omit the foundation settlement and water damage from the property disclosure statement to avoid deterring buyers, assuming buyers will discover these issues during their own inspections. Option C. Advise the seller that these known material defects must be disclosed to all prospective buyers and ensure they are accurately documented on the seller's property disclosure statement. Or, if the seller refuses, the salesperson must disclose these known material facts to potential buyers themselves. Option D. Recommend that the seller perform only superficial repairs to the visible damage before listing, without disclosing the underlying issues, to present the property in a more favorable light. The correct answer is C. Advise the seller that these known material defects must be disclosed to all prospective buyers and ensure they are accurately documented on the seller's property disclosure statement. Or, if the seller refuses, the salesperson must disclose these known material facts to potential buyers themselves. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario where a Mississippi real estate salesperson is presented with a potential listing that has significant structural issues, including evidence of foundation settlement and water damage. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires the salesperson to balance their fiduciary duty to the seller with their obligation to disclose material facts to potential buyers, all while adhering to Mississippi's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards. Failure to properly disclose can lead to legal repercussions, loss of license, and damage to reputation. The best professional approach involves a thorough and transparent disclosure process. This means the salesperson should advise the seller that these material defects must be disclosed to all prospective buyers. The salesperson should then document these discussions and ensure that the seller's property disclosure statement accurately reflects the known issues. Or if the seller refuses to disclose, the salesperson must still disclose these known material facts to potential buyers, even if it means losing the listing. This aligns with Mississippi Real Estate Commission (MREC) regulations, which mandate that licensees must disclose all known material facts about a property, and the National Association of Realtors Registered Code of Ethics, which emphasizes honesty and full disclosure. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with marketing the property without disclosing the foundation settlement and water damage, hoping that buyers will discover the issues during inspection. This violates Mississippi law requiring disclosure of known material defects and breaches the salesperson's duty of honesty and fair dealing. Another incorrect approach is to agree to the seller's request to omit these issues from the disclosure statement, thereby actively participating in a misrepresentation. This directly contravenes MREC regulations and ethical obligations, potentially leading to disciplinary action. Finally, advising the seller to simply fix it quickly before anyone notices, without proper remediation and disclosure, is also professionally unacceptable. While addressing issues is good, doing so to conceal them from buyers is deceptive and violates disclosure requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency and legal compliance. When faced with a property that has known material defects, the first step is to understand the nature and severity of the defects. Next, the salesperson must consult the relevant Mississippi real estate laws and MREC rules regarding disclosure obligations. The salesperson should then have a frank discussion with the seller about these obligations, explaining the legal and ethical ramifications of non-disclosure. If the seller remains unwilling to disclose, the salesperson must determine if they can ethically and legally continue to represent the seller, often meaning they must withdraw from the transaction if disclosure cannot be achieved. Documentation of all communications and decisions is crucial. Question 9. The control framework reveals that a Mississippi real estate salesperson is assisting a client in selling their home. During the final walkthrough, the seller mentions they are taking a large, custom-built shelving unit that is securely attached to the wall of the living room. The salesperson must determine if this shelving unit is considered part of the real estate transaction under Mississippi law. Which of the following best reflects the salesperson's professional responsibility and understanding of real estate definitions in Mississippi? Option A. The salesperson should advise the seller that the shelving unit is personal property and can be removed without any implications for the real estate transaction. Option B. The salesperson should consider the shelving unit personal property because the seller stated they intend to remove it, regardless of its attachment to the property. Option C. The salesperson must recognize that a securely attached, custom-built shelving unit integrated into the home structure is likely a fixture and therefore part of the real estate transaction, requiring adherence to Mississippi real estate license law. Option D. The salesperson can proceed with the sale without addressing the shelving unit, as it is a minor detail not typically covered by real estate regulations. The correct answer is C. The salesperson must recognize that a securely attached, custom-built shelving unit integrated into the home structure is likely a fixture and therefore part of the real estate transaction, requiring adherence to Mississippi real estate license law. Explanation. The control framework reveals the critical importance of understanding the fundamental definition and significance of real estate in Mississippi for licensed professionals. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a salesperson to distinguish between a mere personal property transaction and a real estate transaction, which carries specific licensing requirements and fiduciary duties under Mississippi law. Misinterpreting this distinction can lead to unlicensed activity, ethical breaches, and legal repercussions for both the salesperson and the client. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the Mississippi real estate license law and to uphold professional standards. The best approach involves recognizing that the sale of a fixture, which has become permanently attached to the land and is essential to its use and enjoyment, constitutes a real estate transaction. This aligns with the definition of real property under Mississippi law, which includes land and anything permanently attached to it. A licensed Mississippi real estate salesperson has a legal and ethical obligation to ensure all transactions involving real property are conducted in accordance with the Mississippi real estate license law, which mandates licensure for anyone engaging in such activities for compensation. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and client protection by correctly identifying the nature of the transaction and the necessity of licensed involvement. An incorrect approach would be to treat the sale of the built-in shelving unit as a simple personal property transaction. This fails to acknowledge that when an item is permanently affixed to the real estate and becomes an integral part of it, it is legally considered a fixture and part of the real property. This misclassification bypasses the requirements of the Mississippi real estate license law, potentially leading to the salesperson engaging in unlicensed brokerage activity, which is a violation of state statutes and carries penalties. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with the sale without clarifying the nature of the shelving unit and its attachment to the property. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to adhere to professional standards. A Mississippi real estate salesperson must exercise reasonable care and skill which includes understanding the legal classification of items within a property transaction. Failing to do so can result in misrepresentation and harm to the client. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to advise the seller that the shelving unit is personal property solely based on the seller's assertion, without independent verification or consideration of its physical attachment and integration with the property. This abdication of professional responsibility and reliance on potentially uninformed client statements is contrary to the ethical obligations of a licensed professional in Mississippi. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve 1. Identifying the core asset being transferred. 2. Determining if the asset is real property, land, and anything permanently attached or personal property. 3. Consulting relevant state statutes, such as the Mississippi Real Estate License Law and Property Law definitions, to confirm classification. 4. If the transaction involves real property, ensuring all actions are taken by a licensed professional in compliance with all applicable regulations. 5. Prioritizing client interests through accurate advice and legal compliance. Question 10. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a potential borrower in Mississippi has a stated gross monthly income of $500 and existing monthly debt payments of $800. The proposed mortgage payment, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance is estimated at $500. The lender's policy requires a maximum debt-to-income ratio, DTI, of 43%. If the borrower also has a car loan payment of $400 that was not initially included in the existing debt payments, how much does the borrower's DTI increase and what is the new DTI? Option A. The DTI increases by 64 percentage points, resulting in a new DTI of 64%. Option B. The DTI increases by 0 percentage points, resulting in a new DTI of 41.00%. Option C. The DTI increases by 0 percentage points, resulting in a new DTI of 42.00%. Option D. The DTI increases by 37 percentage points, resulting in a new DTI of 73%. The correct answer is D. The DTI increases by 37 percentage points, resulting in a new DTI of 73%. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in loan underwriting where a borrower's financial situation appears borderline. The loan officer must balance the need to approve viable loans with the responsibility to protect the lender from undue risk and adhere to Mississippi's regulatory requirements for mortgage lending. Misjudging the borrower's capacity or misapplying underwriting guidelines can lead to significant financial losses for the lender and potential regulatory penalties. The pressure to meet sales targets can also create an ethical dilemma, making objective assessment crucial. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of the borrower's complete financial profile, including all submitted documentation, and applying the lender's established underwriting guidelines and Mississippi's relevant lending regulations. This includes a detailed analysis of the debt-to-income ratio, credit history, and the stability of the borrower's income. If the initial assessment indicates a marginal approval, the loan officer should explore all permissible options within the guidelines, such as requesting additional documentation to verify income or assets, or suggesting a lower loan amount or different loan product that better fits the borrower's demonstrated capacity. This systematic and documented approach ensures compliance with Mississippi's laws and ethical lending practices, prioritizing sound financial judgment over expediency. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to approve the loan based on a partial understanding of the borrower's financial situation, overlooking discrepancies, or failing to request necessary supporting documentation. This violates the fundamental duty of due diligence in underwriting and exposes the lender to unacceptable risk, potentially contravening Mississippi's prudential lending standards. Another incorrect approach is to automatically deny the loan, without a comprehensive review or consideration of alternative solutions that might still meet underwriting criteria. Risk mitigation is important. A rigid and unexamined denial without exploring all legitimate options can be seen as poor customer service and may not align with the lender's broader business objectives, provided such alternatives are compliant with regulations. A third incorrect approach is to approve the loan by making assumptions about the borrower's future income or by selectively ignoring unfavorable financial indicators. This is a direct violation of underwriting principles and Mississippi's regulatory framework, which requires objective assessment based on verifiable data. Such actions can lead to loan defaults and significant losses, as well as regulatory sanctions for deceptive or negligent lending practices. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Mississippi should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes a comprehensive, data-driven, and compliant underwriting process. This involves 1. Gathering all required documentation. 2. Verifying the accuracy and completeness of the information. 3. Applying established underwriting guidelines and relevant Mississippi statutes consistently. 4. Identifying any potential risks and assessing their impact. 5. Exploring all permissible solutions within regulatory boundaries if the initial assessment is borderline. 6. Documenting every step of the decision-making process thoroughly. This structured approach ensures both regulatory compliance and sound risk management. Question 11. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential for client misunderstanding regarding property rights in Mississippi. A prospective buyer is inquiring about the difference between owning a property outright, having a long-term rental agreement, and situations where multiple individuals own a single property. Which of the following explanations most accurately reflects the distinctions under Mississippi real estate law? Option A. Outright ownership is known as fee simple, granting indefinite possession and control. A long-term rental agreement represents a leasehold interest, providing temporary use rights, and multiple owners can hold property as joint tenants with survivorship or tenants in common without survivorship. Option B. A leasehold interest is the most complete form of ownership, allowing indefinite possession. Fee simple ownership is a temporary right to use the property. Joint tenancy and tenancy in common are identical forms of co-ownership. Option C. Outright ownership is a fee simple interest, which is a temporary right to occupy the property. A long-term rental agreement is also a form of fee simple ownership. Joint tenancy and tenancy in common are essentially the same way for multiple people to own property. Option D. Fee simple ownership is a temporary right to occupy a property. A leasehold interest is the same as outright ownership. Joint tenancy is a form of co-ownership where each owner's share can be willed to their heirs. The correct answer is A. Outright ownership is known as fee simple, granting indefinite possession and control. A long-term rental agreement represents a leasehold interest, providing temporary use rights, and multiple owners can hold property as joint tenants with survivorship or tenants in common without survivorship. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in real estate transactions where differing interpretations of ownership rights can lead to disputes and legal complications. A real estate licensee must accurately identify and explain the nature of property ownership to their clients to ensure informed decision-making and compliance with Mississippi law. Misunderstanding or misrepresenting these ownership types can result in significant financial and legal repercussions for all parties involved, and professional liability for the licensee. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly distinguishing between fee simple ownership and leasehold interests, and accurately describing the characteristics of joint tenancy and tenancy in common as they apply to multiple owners. Fee simple represents the most complete form of ownership, granting the owner the right to possess, use, and dispose of the property indefinitely. Leasehold, conversely, is a temporary right to occupy and use property granted by a landlord to a tenant. Joint tenancy and tenancy in common are forms of co-ownership, with joint tenancy characterized by the right of survivorship and tenancy in common lacking this feature, allowing for individual inheritance of shares. A licensee must be able to articulate these distinctions to a client seeking to understand their property rights. Incorrect approaches analysis. Presenting fee simple as a temporary right to occupy the property is a fundamental misrepresentation of the highest form of ownership, failing to acknowledge its indefinite nature and the owner's comprehensive rights. Equating a leasehold interest with outright ownership, without emphasizing its temporary and conditional nature, misleads clients about their rights and obligations. Describing joint tenancy and tenancy in common as identical forms of co-ownership, without differentiating the crucial element of survivorship in joint tenancy, ignores a key legal distinction that significantly impacts inheritance and property distribution. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first identifying the core legal concepts at play. They must then consult relevant Mississippi real estate law and licensing regulations to ensure their explanations are accurate and compliant. A decision-making framework would involve 1. Understanding the client's specific situation and the type of property interest they are inquiring about. 2. Recalling or researching the precise definitions and legal implications of each ownership type under Mississippi law. 3. Clearly and accurately communicating these distinctions to the client, using plain language while maintaining legal precision. 4. Documenting the advice provided to protect both the client and the licensee. Question 12. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a property listed for sale in Mississippi is located near a former industrial site that may have had historical chemical storage. What is the most prudent course of action for the listing salesperson to ensure compliance with Mississippi's environmental regulations and ethical obligations? Option A. Recommend that the seller wait for a buyer to specifically ask about environmental contamination before disclosing any potential concerns. Option B. Advise the seller to obtain a Phase I environmental site assessment (ESSA) and ensure its findings are disclosed to all prospective buyers, along with any other relevant environmental reports. Option C. Advise the seller to simply disclose that the property is near a former industrial site and let buyers conduct their own investigations without further proactive steps. Option D. Suggest that the salesperson conduct a visual inspection of the property to determine if any environmental issues are apparent and disclose only those observations. Correct answer is B. Advise the seller to obtain a Phase I environmental site assessment (ESSA) and ensure its findings are disclosed to all prospective buyers, along with any other relevant environmental reports. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Mississippi to navigate potential environmental liabilities that could impact a property's value and marketability. Failing to adequately address these concerns can lead to significant legal and financial repercussions for both the seller and the buyer, as well as damage the salesperson's reputation and license. The salesperson must balance their duty to the seller to market the property effectively with their ethical obligation to disclose material facts and their legal responsibility to comply with Mississippi's environmental disclosure requirements. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively identifying and disclosing potential environmental concerns to all parties involved. This approach requires the salesperson to advise the seller to obtain a Phase I environmental site assessment (ESSA) if there are any indications of past or present environmental contamination. The salesperson should then ensure that the results of this assessment, along with any other relevant environmental reports or disclosures mandated by Mississippi law, are provided to prospective buyers early in the transaction. This aligns with Mississippi's disclosure laws and general principles of ethical real estate practice, which emphasize transparency and the avoidance of misrepresentation or concealment of material facts. By facilitating a thorough investigation and disclosure, the salesperson helps mitigate risks for all parties and ensures compliance with Mississippi's regulatory framework concerning property transactions and environmental due diligence. Incorrect approaches analysis. Advising the seller to simply hope for the best and not disclose any potential environmental issues, even if not explicitly asked, is a failure to uphold the duty of good faith and fair dealing. This approach risks violating Mississippi's disclosure requirements and could lead to legal action if a buyer discovers contamination post-sale. It also demonstrates a lack of professional diligence. Another incorrect approach is to only disclose environmental concerns if a buyer specifically inquires about them. While direct inquiries must be answered truthfully, Mississippi law and ethical standards often require proactive disclosure of known or reasonably discoverable material facts, including potential environmental hazards, regardless of whether a buyer asks. This passive approach can still result in liability for the salesperson and seller. Finally, suggesting that the salesperson personally conduct a superficial inspection to assess environmental risks without proper training or certification is unprofessional and potentially negligent. Environmental assessments require specialized expertise, and a salesperson's informal opinion is not a substitute for a professional evaluation and carries no legal weight in terms of due diligence. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, due diligence, and compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. This involves 1. Identifying potential red flags, recognizing signs that might indicate environmental concerns, e.g., proximity to industrial sites, historical land use. 2. Consulting with experts, recommending professional environmental assessments when warranted. 3. Full disclosure, ensuring all known or reasonably discoverable material environmental facts are disclosed to all parties. 4. Documentation, maintaining records of all disclosures and assessments. 5. Seeking legal counsel, consulting with an attorney when complex environmental issues arise. This systematic approach ensures that all parties are informed, risks are managed, and legal and ethical obligations are met. Question 13. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a prospective buyer in Mississippi expresses a strong preference for a neighborhood based on its perceived racial or ethnic homogeneity, stating, "I'd really prefer to live in an area where most people are like me." As a licensed real estate salesperson, how should you ethically and legally respond to this statement? Option A. Agree to the client's request and focus your property search exclusively within the neighborhood they specified. Option B. Ignore the client's comment about the neighborhood and proceed with showing properties in various locations without further discussion. Option C. Directly refuse to show any properties in the neighborhood the client mentioned, stating it's not a desirable area. Option D. Acknowledge the client's preference but explain that decisions must be based on objective criteria like school districts, commute times, or proximity to amenities, and that you cannot steer clients based on protected characteristics. The correct answer is D. Acknowledge the client's preference but explain that decisions must be based on objective criteria like school districts, commute times, or proximity to amenities, and that you cannot steer clients based on protected characteristics. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee to navigate a situation where a potential client's stated preference could inadvertently lead to discriminatory practices, violating fair housing laws. The licensee must balance the client's expressed desires with their legal and ethical obligations to treat all prospective buyers equally and without prejudice. The challenge lies in politely but firmly steering the conversation away from discriminatory steering, while still attempting to serve the client's legitimate housing needs. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves acknowledging the client's stated preference without validating or acting upon the discriminatory aspect. The licensee should then pivot to discussing objective housing criteria that are permissible under fair housing laws, such as proximity to schools, transportation, or specific amenities, and explain that decisions must be based on these factors, not on protected characteristics. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the client's underlying need for information about neighborhoods while upholding the principles of the Fair Housing Act of 1968, as enforced in Mississippi. It avoids discriminatory steering by focusing on neutral, objective criteria and implicitly educates the client about legal boundaries. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to directly refuse to show properties in the specified neighborhood, citing only that it is a bad area without further explanation. This is problematic because it lacks transparency and could be perceived as discriminatory itself, or at least unhelpful, without educating the client on the legal reasons for the refusal. It fails to offer alternative, permissible ways to meet the client's needs. Another incorrect approach is to agree to the client's request and actively seek out properties only in the neighborhood they specified, based on their stated preference. This is a direct violation of fair housing laws, as it constitutes discriminatory steering. The licensee would be facilitating discrimination by limiting the client's options based on the racial or ethnic composition of a neighborhood, which is prohibited under federal and state fair housing regulations. A third incorrect approach is to ignore the client's comment about the neighborhood and proceed with showing properties in a variety of locations without addressing the underlying concern or educating the client. While seemingly neutral, this approach misses an opportunity to address potential discriminatory intent and could lead to frustration for the client if their underlying, albeit poorly articulated, need is not met. It also fails to reinforce the licensee's commitment to fair housing principles. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. When faced with a client's request that may border on or lead to discriminatory practices, The licensee should first identify the potential fair housing violation. Then, they should consider how to address the client's underlying needs in a lawful and ethical manner. This involves open communication, education about fair housing laws, and a commitment to providing equal service to all clients, focusing on objective, non-discriminatory criteria for property selection. Question 14. Stakeholder feedback indicates that a real estate salesperson in Mississippi is representing a seller who has received multiple offers. One offer is the highest in price, but is contingent upon the buyer securing financing that is dependent on a future appraisal of the property. What is the most prudent and ethically sound approach for the salesperson to advise the seller regarding this offer? Option A. Advise the seller to accept the offer immediately because it is the highest price presented, without dwelling on the specifics of the financing contingency. Option B. Suggest that the seller disregard the financing contingency and proceed with the assumption that the buyer will secure the necessary funds regardless of the appraisal outcome. Option C. Thoroughly explain the risks and uncertainties associated with the buyer's financing contingency, including the possibility of the appraisal coming in lower than the offer price, and advise the seller on the potential implications for the sale. Option D. Emphasize the buyer's strong interest and the salesperson's potential commission to encourage the seller to accept the offer, while minimizing discussion of the financing uncertainties. The correct answer is C. Thoroughly explain the risks and uncertainties associated with the buyer's financing contingency, including the possibility of the appraisal coming in lower than the offer price, and advise the seller on the potential implications for the sale. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Mississippi to balance the client's immediate desire for a quick sale with the fiduciary duty to ensure the client understands the financial implications and potential risks of accepting a below-market offer, especially when the buyer's financing is contingent on a future event. Misrepresenting or downplaying these risks could lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions for the salesperson and harm to the client. Careful judgment is required to provide accurate, unbiased advice. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly explaining to the seller the risks associated with the buyer's financing contingency, particularly the uncertainty of the buyer securing the necessary funds based on a future appraisal. This includes advising the seller that the offer price may not be achievable if the appraisal comes in lower than expected, and that the seller should consider the implications of a potentially delayed or failed sale. This approach aligns with Mississippi Real Estate Commission (MREC) regulations requiring licensees to present all offers and to advise clients honestly and competently regarding all material aspects of a transaction, including financing terms and their potential impact on the sale. It upholds the fiduciary duty of loyalty and care. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately advising the seller to accept the offer because it is the highest received, without adequately detailing the risks of the buyer's financing contingency. This fails to meet the MREC requirement to inform the seller of all material facts and potential consequences, potentially leading the seller to make an uninformed decision. It prioritizes a superficial outcome, highest offer, over the client's best interests and understanding of the transaction's complexities. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the buyer's perceived enthusiasm and the salesperson's commission, downplaying the financing uncertainties to encourage acceptance. This is a clear breach of fiduciary duty and MREC guidelines, as it prioritizes personal gain over the client's welfare and misrepresents material facts about the transaction's viability. A third incorrect approach is to suggest the seller ignore the financing contingency and proceed as if the funds are guaranteed. This is highly unethical and legally unsound, as it misleads the seller about the security of the offer and exposes them to significant risk of a failed transaction and potential damages. It violates the MREC mandate for honesty and competence in advising clients. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize their clients' informed consent and best interests. This involves a thorough assessment of all offer terms, especially financing contingencies, and clear, transparent communication of potential risks and benefits. When faced with complex financing, a professional should explain the implications of contingencies, advise on potential outcomes, and empower the client to make a decision based on complete information. Rather than pushing for a quick acceptance, that may not be in the client's long-term interest. Question 15. The monitoring system demonstrates that a Mississippi real estate licensee has listed a property for sale. The client has expressed a strong desire for the property to be advertised widely across various platforms to attract the largest possible pool of potential buyers. The licensee is confident in their marketing abilities and wants to ensure they are compensated for their efforts if the property sells during the listing period, regardless of who finds the buyer, which approach best aligns with the client's stated objective and the licensee's desire for commission protection under Mississippi real estate law. Option A. Enter into an exclusive right to sell listing agreement, ensuring the client understands that a commission will be paid if the property sells during the listing term, irrespective of the procuring cause. Option B. Advise the client to pursue an open listing agreement, allowing them to list with multiple brokers and retain the right to sell the property themselves without commission obligations to any broker. Option C. Proceed with an exclusive agency listing agreement, emphasizing to the client that they retain the right to sell the property themselves without owing a commission. Option D. Suggest a verbal agreement for a general listing, relying on mutual understanding of marketing efforts and commission expectations. Correct answer is A. Enter into an exclusive right to sell listing agreement, ensuring the client understands that a commission will be paid if the property sells during the listing term, irrespective of the procuring cause. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee in Mississippi to balance the client's desire for broad marketing with the licensee's fiduciary duty to secure the best possible outcome for the client, while also adhering to Mississippi's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards. Misinterpreting the listing agreement type can lead to disputes, loss of commission, and disciplinary action. Careful judgment is required to ensure the agreement accurately reflects the agreed-upon terms and protects both the client and the licensee. The best professional practice involves clearly understanding and documenting the type of listing agreement in place, ensuring it aligns with the client's objectives and the licensee's intended scope of work. In this case, if the client wants the widest possible exposure and is willing to pay a commission regardless of who procures the buyer, an exclusive right to sell agreement is the most appropriate. This agreement provides the highest level of protection for the broker, as it guarantees a commission if the property sells during the listing period, regardless of whether the broker, the seller, or another party brings the buyer. Mississippi law, through its licensing regulations and common brokerage practices, supports the use of such agreements when they clearly define the terms and responsibilities, ensuring clarity and preventing disputes over commission entitlement. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with an exclusive agency listing without fully clarifying the client's understanding of its implications. This type of agreement means the seller can sell the property themselves without owing a commission, but the broker is still entitled to a commission if they or another broker procures the buyer. If the client's primary goal is maximum exposure and they are not concerned about procuring the buyer themselves, this agreement might not fully align with their implicit expectations of broad marketing efforts being rewarded. Furthermore, misrepresenting the terms of an open listing, where the seller can list with multiple brokers and owes a commission only to the one who procures the buyer, would be a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This type of listing offers the least protection to the broker and can lead to disputes if not clearly understood and agreed upon by all parties. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes clear communication and documentation. This involves thoroughly discussing the different types of listing agreements with the client, explaining the implications of each in terms of commission entitlement and marketing scope, and ensuring the client fully understands and agrees to the chosen agreement. The agreement itself must be in writing, clearly state all terms and conditions, and be signed by all parties, as mandated by Mississippi real estate regulations. When in doubt, it is always best to err on the side of clarity and ensure the client's informed consent. Question 16. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need to clarify agency responsibilities in real estate transactions within Mississippi. A licensed Mississippi real estate salesperson is working with a seller to list their property. During the listing presentation, the salesperson learns that a buyer, who is a repeat client of the salesperson, is interested in purchasing the seller's property. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the salesperson to take immediately? Option A. Obtain informed written consent from both the seller and the buyer to act as a dual agent, clearly explaining the implications of this role to both parties before proceeding with any further negotiations or disclosures. Option B. Inform both parties that due to the conflict of interest, the salesperson can no longer represent either party in this transaction and must withdraw. Option C. Inform the seller that the buyer is interested in their property and proceed to negotiate the sale, prioritizing the seller's best interests as the listing agent. Option D. Inform the buyer that their offer will be presented to the seller, but do not disclose to the seller that the salesperson also represents the buyer. The correct answer is A. Obtain informed written consent from both the seller and the buyer to act as a dual agent, clearly explaining the implications of this role to both parties before proceeding with any further negotiations or disclosures. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict of interest that arises when a real estate licensee attempts to represent both the seller and the buyer in the same transaction without proper disclosure and consent. Navigating agency relationships requires strict adherence to Mississippi's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards to maintain client trust and avoid legal repercussions. The licensee must prioritize transparency and informed consent to ensure all parties understand the nature of the representation and their respective rights. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining informed written consent from both the seller and the buyer before proceeding with dual agency. This approach ensures that both parties are fully aware that the licensee will be representing their interests simultaneously and that the licensee's fiduciary duties may be divided. Mississippi law requires explicit disclosure and consent for dual agency, as outlined in the Mississippi Real Estate License Law. This proactive disclosure and consent process is crucial for ethical conduct and legal compliance, preventing potential disputes and upholding the integrity of the transaction. Incorrect approaches analysis. Representing both parties without first obtaining their explicit written consent to dual agency is a direct violation of Mississippi's Real Estate License Law. This failure to disclose the agency relationship and obtain consent creates a conflict of interest and breaches the fiduciary duty owed to both parties. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that simply informing the seller that the buyer is also being represented is sufficient. Mississippi law mandates a formal written consent process for dual agency. Furthermore, attempting to prioritize one party's interests over the other while claiming to represent both is unethical and legally unsound, as dual agency requires impartiality and the balancing of both parties' interests to the extent possible within the confines of the law. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach agency relationships by first clearly identifying their intended role with each party. Before any substantive negotiations or disclosures occur, they must determine if a dual agency situation is contemplated. If so, the immediate next step is to consult the relevant sections of the Mississippi Real Estate License Law concerning agency disclosure and dual agency. The licensee must then prepare the necessary disclosure and consent forms and present them to both parties for review and signature. This process should be documented thoroughly. If either party refuses to consent to dual agency, the licensee must choose to represent only one party or withdraw from the transaction entirely. This systematic approach prioritizes legal compliance, ethical conduct, and client protection. Question 17. The efficiency study reveals that a Mississippi real estate salesperson is approaching their license renewal deadline and needs to complete their required continuing education hours. Which of the following actions best ensures compliance with the Mississippi Real Estate Commission's licensing requirements? Option A. Enrolling in online real estate courses that appear relevant to sales but have not been confirmed as MREC approved. Option B. Proactively scheduling and completing all required continuing education hours from MREC approved providers several months before the license renewal deadline. Option C. Relying on a colleague to remind them of the renewal deadline and the number of CE hours needed without independently verifying with the Mississippi Real Estate Commission. Option D. Waiting until the final month before renewal to search for and complete any available real estate courses, hoping they will be accepted. The correct answer is B. Proactively scheduling and completing all required continuing education hours from MREC-approved providers several months before the license renewal deadline. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a common challenge in maintaining active real estate licenses, ensuring timely completion of continuing education. C. Requirements. This scenario is professionally challenging because a lapse in CE can lead to a suspended or revoked license, impacting a salesperson's ability to practice and potentially exposing them to disciplinary action from the Mississippi Real Estate Commission, MREC. Careful judgment is required to navigate the MREC-specific CE rules and deadlines. The best approach involves proactively tracking CE deadlines and utilizing MREC-approved courses well in advance of the expiration date. This ensures compliance with Mississippi's licensing laws, specifically those outlined by the MREC regarding the renewal period and the mandatory number of hours of continuing education required for licensed real estate salespeople. By completing CE early, a salesperson demonstrates professionalism, diligence, and a commitment to maintaining their license in good standing, thereby avoiding any risk of noncompliance. An incorrect approach involves waiting until the last few weeks before the license renewal deadline to begin or complete CE. This creates unnecessary pressure and increases the risk of unforeseen issues, such as course availability problems, technical difficulties, or personal emergencies preventing timely completion. This failure to plan ahead can lead to a missed deadline, resulting in a lapsed license and potential penalties. Another incorrect approach is to assume that any real estate course will satisfy the CE requirement. Mississippi law, as enforced by the MREC, mandates that CE courses must be approved by the Commission. Taking unapproved courses, even if relevant to real estate, will not count towards the required hours and will result in noncompliance upon renewal. A final incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal reminders from colleagues or third-party providers, without independently verifying the status of one's CE hours and the upcoming renewal deadline with the MREC. While helpful, these informal methods are not a substitute for diligent personal record-keeping and direct communication with the regulatory body. Failure to do so could lead to a misunderstanding of the exact number of hours completed or the precise deadline, jeopardizing the license. Professionals should adopt a proactive decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and adhering to all MREC regulations regarding license renewal and continuing education. This includes regularly checking their CE status directly with the MREC, identifying approved courses, and scheduling their completion well in advance of any deadlines. Question 18. The efficiency study reveals a need to optimize the mortgage application process for a Mississippi licensed loan originator. Which of the following strategies best balances the need for speed with the imperative of regulatory compliance and ethical borrower treatment? Option A. Prioritize speed by accepting incomplete borrower documentation initially and planning to gather missing information later, assuming the borrower will provide it. Option B. Implement automated data verification and document submission technologies, coupled with mandatory human review by the loan originator to ensure accuracy and compliance with Mississippi lending laws and federal regulations. Option C. Streamline the process by reducing the number of mandatory disclosures provided to borrowers to save time and simplify their experience. Option D. Solely rely on third-party software for applicant pre-qualification, trusting its claims of Mississippi lending law compliance without independent loan originator review. The correct answer is B. Implement automated data verification and document submission technologies, coupled with mandatory human review by the loan originator to ensure accuracy and compliance with Mississippi lending laws and federal regulations. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a need to optimize the mortgage application process for a Mississippi licensed loan originator. This scenario is professionally challenging because the mortgage application process involves strict regulatory compliance, ethical considerations, and the potential for significant financial impact on both the borrower and the lender. A loan originator must balance speed and efficiency with accuracy, fairness, and adherence to Mississippi's specific lending laws and federal regulations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that process improvements do not inadvertently compromise these critical aspects. The best approach involves proactively identifying and addressing potential bottlenecks in the application workflow by implementing technology that automates data verification and document submission, while simultaneously ensuring that all automated processes are reviewed and validated by a human loan originator to confirm compliance with Mississippi's mortgage lending regulations and federal consumer protection laws. This approach is correct because it leverages technology to enhance efficiency without sacrificing the essential human oversight required for regulatory compliance and accurate borrower assessment. It directly addresses the need for speed while maintaining the integrity of the application process, which is paramount in the mortgage industry. This aligns with the ethical duty to provide accurate information and fair treatment to borrowers, as well as the legal requirement to comply with all applicable lending statutes. An incorrect approach involves solely relying on third-party software to pre-qualify applicants without any independent review by the loan originator, even if the software claims to be compliant with Mississippi lending laws. This is professionally unacceptable because it abdicates the loan originator's responsibility to ensure the accuracy and completeness of the application and to verify compliance with all relevant regulations. The loan originator remains ultimately responsible for the information submitted, and blind reliance on automated systems can lead to errors, misrepresentations, and violations of Mississippi's mortgage lending statutes and federal fair lending laws. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize speed by accepting incomplete documentation from borrowers and promising to fill in the blanks later, assuming that the borrower will provide the missing information. This is professionally unacceptable as it violates the principle of obtaining a complete and accurate loan application at the outset. Mississippi regulations and federal guidelines require a thorough and accurate application to be the foundation of the mortgage process. Delaying the collection of essential information can lead to inaccurate risk assessments, potential fraud, and ultimately, a failure to comply with the Truth in Lending Act (TILA) and other disclosure requirements. A final incorrect approach is to streamline the process by reducing the number of disclosures provided to borrowers, arguing that it simplifies the process and saves time. This is professionally unacceptable and a direct violation of federal regulations, including TILA and the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, RESPA, which mandate specific disclosures at particular points in the mortgage application process. Failing to provide these disclosures in a timely and accurate manner is a serious regulatory violation and an ethical breach, as it deprives borrowers of crucial information needed to make informed decisions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct alongside efficiency. This involves understanding the specific requirements of Mississippi's mortgage lending laws and federal regulations, identifying areas where technology can enhance processes without compromising oversight, and maintaining a commitment to transparency and accuracy throughout the application lifecycle. Regular training on regulatory updates and a culture of accountability are essential for navigating the complexities of the mortgage application process. Question 19. The evaluation methodology shows that when advising a client on real estate financing options in Mississippi, a licensee must consider various factors to ensure a sound transaction. Which of the following represents the most responsible and ethically compliant approach for a Mississippi real estate licensee? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the borrower's income, credit history, and existing debt to determine their capacity to service the proposed loan, and assess the property's market value to ensure the loan-to-value ratio is prudent within the current Mississippi real estate market. Option B. Rely on the borrower's verbal assurances regarding their financial stability and the property's marketability without independent verification. Option C. Recommend the financing option that offers the highest potential loan amount, assuming the borrower can manage the payments based on their stated income. Option D. Focus on securing financing that is most favorable to the seller or the lender, as their satisfaction is crucial for closing the deal. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of the borrower's income, credit history, and existing debt to determine their capacity to service the proposed loan, and assess the property's market value to ensure the loan-to-value ratio is prudent within the current Mississippi real estate market. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that navigating the complexities of real estate financing in Mississippi requires a thorough understanding of both borrower capacity and market conditions. This scenario is professionally challenging because a real estate licensee must act in the best interest of their client, while also ensuring compliance with Mississippi's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards. Misjudging a borrower's ability to repay or the viability of a financing structure can lead to significant financial harm for the client and potential disciplinary action for the licensee. The best approach involves a comprehensive assessment of the borrower's financial situation and the proposed loan terms. This includes verifying income, creditworthiness, and existing debt obligations to determine a realistic debt-to-income ratio. Furthermore, it requires understanding the current Mississippi real estate market to ensure the loan-to-value ratio is appropriate and that the property itself can support the proposed financing. This diligent and client-focused evaluation aligns with the Mississippi Real Estate Commission's mandate for licensees to be competent and to act with honesty and integrity, safeguarding the public's interest. An approach that focuses solely on securing the highest possible loan amount for the borrower without a thorough assessment of their repayment capacity is professionally unacceptable. This failure to adequately assess the borrower's financial stability could lead to default, foreclosure, and significant financial distress for the borrower, violating the licensee's fiduciary duty. Another unacceptable approach is to prioritize the lender's or seller's interests over the borrower's. While a licensee may work with various parties, their primary obligation is to their client. Recommending a financing option that benefits the licensee or the lender, but is not in the borrower's best financial interest, is an ethical breach and potentially a violation of Mississippi's real estate laws. Finally, an approach that relies on assumptions about the borrower's financial situation or the market without independent verification is also professionally unsound. This lack of due diligence can result in recommending unsuitable financing options, exposing the borrower to undue risk. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with clearly identifying their client's needs and objectives. This is followed by a thorough investigation of all relevant factors, including the client's financial profile, the property's value, and prevailing market and financing conditions. The licensee must then use this information to advise the client on the most suitable and sustainable financing options, always prioritizing the client's best interests and adhering to all applicable Mississippi regulations. Question 20. Benchmark analysis indicates that a Mississippi real estate licensee is tasked with advising a seller on the optimal listing price for a single-family home in a well-established suburban neighborhood. The licensee has gathered data from recent sales of comparable properties, estimated the cost to rebuild the home with depreciation, and calculated the potential annual rental income. The comparative market analysis suggests a value of $350,000. The cost approach indicates a value of $380,000, and the income approach suggests a value of $320,000. Which valuation method should the licensee primarily rely on to advise the seller on an appropriate listing price? Option A. A weighted average of all three approaches, as this provides a more comprehensive valuation. Option B. The income approach, as it accounts for the property's potential to generate rental income. Option C. The cost approach, as it considers the expense of replacing the structure and land value. Option D. The comparative market analysis, as it best reflects current market demand and buyer behavior for residential properties. Correct answer is D. The comparative market analysis, as it best reflects current market demand and buyer behavior for residential properties. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for Mississippi real estate licensees, accurately valuing a property for a client when multiple valuation methods yield different results. The professional challenge lies in selecting the most appropriate method and justifying the chosen valuation to the client, ensuring it aligns with industry standards and ethical obligations under Mississippi real estate law. Misapplication of valuation methods can lead to client dissatisfaction, potential legal issues, and damage to the licensee's reputation. Correct approach analysis. The most appropriate approach in this scenario is the comparative market analysis, CMA. CMA is a method used by real estate professionals to determine the market value of a property by comparing it to similar properties that have recently sold in the same area. This method is favored because it directly reflects current market conditions and buyer behavior, which is crucial for advising a seller on an appropriate listing price. Mississippi real estate regulations, while not dictating a specific valuation method, emphasize the licensee's duty to provide competent service and accurate information to clients. A CMA, when performed diligently with comparable properties that are truly similar in location, size, features, and condition, best fulfills this duty by offering a market-driven valuation. Incorrect approach is analysis. Using solely the income approach would be inappropriate because it is primarily designed for income-producing properties, such as rental units or commercial buildings. While the property in question might have rental potential, its primary purpose as a single-family residence means that its value is more directly tied to what similar homes are selling for, rather than its potential rental income. Relying solely on this method ignores the direct market demand for residential properties. Employing only the cost approach would also be an incorrect primary method. The cost approach estimates the value of a property by calculating the cost to replace the building, minus depreciation, plus the value of the land. This method is most useful for unique properties, new construction, or insurance purposes, where comparable sales data might be scarce. For standard single-family home in an established neighborhood, it does not accurately reflect what a buyer is willing to pay in the current market, as it doesn't account for buyer preferences or market trends. Failing to consider any of the standard valuation methods and instead relying on a gut feeling or an arbitrary price is a severe ethical and professional failure. Mississippi law requires licensees to act with honesty and integrity and to provide competent service. This includes using established and recognized methods for property valuation. An arbitrary valuation is not based on any objective data or analysis, making it unreliable and potentially misleading to the client. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always begin by understanding the nature of the property and its intended use. For a typical residential property, the comparative market analysis is the foundational valuation tool. If the property has unique characteristics or is an income-producing asset, then the income approach or cost approach might be considered as supplementary methods or primary methods in specific circumstances. However, the licensee must always be able to justify the chosen method and the resulting valuation based on objective data and professional judgment, in accordance with Mississippi's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards.